What is up, you guys? Tristan here, Ingram Orchids and More. In our last video, we talked about, or I mentioned, black rot. So today's video is going to be just about that. It's going to be about black rot. And being at this time of year, if you're like us here in Florida, we're inundated with rain. And one of the things that you need to be careful about and watch out for is black rot. So let's talk a little bit about that. So what is black rot? Black rot, or what we usually call black rot, there's people in different growing circles may talk about black rot and mean different things, but specifically when talking about orchids, we're talking about Oomycetes, the water molds. Those tend to include two main culprits. So the Oomycota or Oomycetes are a branch of life that people tend to associate with fungi, but are actually not very closely related to fungi. I think maybe they're more closely related to like brown algae and you know, some of those weird obscure life forms. But black rot, the water molds, they're this very strange organism. They behave like a pathogenic fungus, and the fact that they infect our plants and they cause severe damage very quickly. It can just quickly move through a plant, just destroying it completely. And they are called water molds because that's what they thrive on. They thrive on water. You can get them in the heat and you can get them in the cold, but wetness is the key there. It's very hard to have black rot when you don't have a lot of moisture present. And when we have days or periods of time like we had here, we had 18 inches of rain when Hurricane Debbie came through, and then days after that it stopped raining, and then it started raining all over again, and that's a recipe for disaster and a recipe for black rot. People tend to think of black rot as being very black. It doesn't always have to be. The two main culprits, I don't even know if I mentioned that or not, the two main culprits of black rot are Pythium and Phytophthora. Those are genuses of Oomycetes that generally affect orchids. I can't remember the exact species of Phytophthora and Pythium. I think it's Pythium ultimum that usually infects orchids, but there's a couple of them that can affect it, but for the most part all you need to know is Pythium and Phytophthora. And in Cattleyas, we'll just talk about Cattleyas first because I have an example for you here. It does tend to cause very black growths, and this is very preventable. But here you can see a Cattleya that has the characteristic brown, mushy, rotten bulb, and this is what just came off of it, and this is what gives it its name. It usually starts off with these very dark black lesions on the leaves. It doesn't always have to be at the base of the leaf like these are. That's where the leaf just fell off as I was moving the plant. Sometimes it can start in the tip. Sometimes it can start in the middle of the bulb. And Phytophthora usually is a root disease in most plants. Phytophthora does not only infect orchids. It's a very devastating disease. Different species of Phytophthora, but worldwide Phytophthora is a huge problem. And the word Phytophthora literally means plant destroyer. And it is just that. It destroys plants. But usually it's a root problem. They usually are infecting the root tips of plants, and they make their way into the plant that way. But not always. You can have Phytophthora and Pythium start off, up in the foliage of the plant or the stem of the plant. It doesn't always have to start off in the roots. Pythium is usually associated in other crops with damping off, and Pythium usually affects the foliage a little bit more before it starts infecting the bottom of the plant, or at least that's what's been my experience. And they usually smell terrible. I can smell this plant just standing a foot away from it here, holding the camera. It is a very characteristic rot smell. It's sickening. It's very, very unpleasant. But you can see there is another bulb in here. And I'm not proud of this, that I let this happen, but it's part of life, and y'all deserve to see it and know what it's about. And we can talk a little bit about how to prevent it. And it's also extremely contagious. So I have this out here away from everything else to show y'all, just because I don't want these plants around other things that it can get to. And before you know it, it's probably going to be in the rest of this plant. I may just toss this whole plant because I'm not very fond of this cattleya. This cattleya never bloomed very well for me anyways. And here we have something that breaks my heart. I noticed the black rot starting on this Certipodium, or this cigar orchid here, right as the rains from Debbie started hitting. By that time that I noticed it, I was pretty sure I was too late, and I was. I tried to trim it off here. I tried to trim off some bulbs here. Doused this with ban rot and Ridamil multiple times. I even let it just soak in a bucket of ban rot and Ridamil, hoping against all hope that I could get it to stop, and lo and behold, it did not. And you can see it's not black. In Certipodiums and Catasetums, it tends to be brown. I'm pretty sure this is Pythium rot. And it starts off up here in the bulb usually, because these bracts, or these leaf bracts, trap water, and water just sits there in pools, and that's the perfect breeding ground for things like Pythium to, you know, get a hold and start replicating and infect the tissues of the plant. And as much as it breaks my heart, I think this is this one might go to orchid heaven. There is this little bit of green here on this new growth that has not been infected yet. It's probably just because I doused it in so much fungicide, but without removing all the infected material, it is bound to come back. So that's another thing we should talk about. Treating with chemicals can, it can stop a lot of this in its tracks before it gets started. Treating with chemicals should be a prevention when we're talking about black rot. It should not, or using fungicides that are effective against black rot or the water molds should be used as a preventative, less so than a treatment. You know, I did treat the plant knowing that once the plant has it, it's really hard to get it to stop. Usually, if something's really valuable, like these cigar orchids, what you can do is bare root them, remove all the infected tissue, you know, sterilize the plant with something like hydrogen peroxide or Physan, maybe, if you have that. And then after you've dried it out a little bit from that, then go ahead and treat with something systemic that is labeled for one of the water molds, like Pythium and Phytophthora. You need to make sure it's effective against that, because like we talked about a minute ago, the water molds are not really fungi. And so, that being said, most of the common fungicides don't really work very well on them. So you want to make sure that the fungicide that you're using is, you know, specifically labeled for Pythium and Phytophthora. Let's see if we can find something else here that has some black rot. Now, I have already removed the tissues from this plant the other day. This plant here was infested with it, and so is this one. It was in the leaves. I'm pretty sure it was Pythium. I have treated everything out here with fungicide, and that's probably why it has stopped. But you can still see here there's still one leaf. After trimming this multiple times, the affected foliage, there's still one leaf here that has an active infection. And really I should be using some clean hot clippers but for the sake of the video, I'm just going to rip it off. So, like I said, it is very contagious, and it can spread very easily to other plants. And so, even though I've already treated these, I should probably come back and treat these once again. And usually, if it's into the stem and the vascular tissues of the plant, and it's not extremely valuable to you, it's best to just go ahead and just toss the plant if it's into the vascular tissues, like the rhizome, because usually at that point it's pretty much a lost cause. Usually, even with a good fungicide treatment and trimming out dead tissue, it tends to come back. But not always. It can be done. I have saved plants from black rot. If you catch it really early, like in this plant, if you catch it when it starts off in just the tips of the leaves, you can usually stop it that way. But look at this plant. This plant is soaking wet, and that's a recipe for disaster. We've had so much rain that these plants have not had a chance to dry out, and so this is going to keep cropping up even with a good fungicide treatment, just because the plants hadn't received any fungicide in so long that the spores from the plant they're hanging around, and you know, the plants have not had enough fungicide treatment to build it up in the plant. I was using mostly Ridamil and Banrot, and that being said, those are two of my favorite that are effective against black rot. Banrot is thiophanate methyl, which everybody uses, they know as thiamel, but there's another chemical that's added in Banrot, and that's tritazole, which is really effective at stopping and killing black rot. But Terrazole or tritazole, the chemical that's in Banrot, is only a topical fungicide. It is not systemic. It doesn't stay in the plant. Banrot is systemic in the fact that the thiophanate methyl in it is taken up by the plants, but the tritazole that's in the Banrot that is effective against black rot is only a topical. Whereas something like Ridamil, most people use the brand Subdue, and it comes, you can get Ridamil or Subdue in generic forms. It's still a very expensive product, but it is systemic. It is taken up by the roots of the plant and moves up the plant. And if you do use something like Ridamil, you need to make sure you get good root coverage, good active root coverage with the plant, or with the chemical, sorry, because it is only taking up by the roots. It moves up the xylem. It doesn't move down through the phloem. So that's why it's important, if you use something like Ridamil, that you're getting good root contact with the chemical. Another chemical, sorry, I'm just looking around the plants as I'm filming. Another good chemical would be, I think it's pronounced Alliette. That's I believe an aluminum compound. That I believe is systemic, and I think it's amphimobile, which means it moves up and down the plant tissues. I've never used that, but there's a lot of orchid growers that do use that. I have never used it solely because I have other chemicals that work. It's a pretty expensive chemical, but there's other orchid growers that use it and they have great luck with it and they swear by it, and I would definitely recommend it, even though I haven't used it myself. Let's say we wanted to work on this Cattleya. So what we would do is we would bare root this Cattleya, trim out all of the roots, and using a using a blowtorch and torching your tools between every incision, every cut that you make into tissues, cut into the plant into nice green healthy tissues below where the active infection is. You want to try your best to not get those juices from that infected tissue onto the rest of the plant. And then once you've done that, you've removed everything that looks infected. You want to soak it in something like hydrogen peroxide, really good, undiluted 3% hydrogen peroxide. And then, like I said, afterwards you follow up with a systemic treatment with a fungicide that is labeled for Oomycetes. This guy here, I tried when it was fresh. Obviously was not good enough. I should have just bare rooted this Certipodium. When I noticed it, I was lazy and thought I could get away with just trimming and treating it with a chemical, and obviously y'all could see that was not enough. The plant still succumbed to the infection, and this one here will shortly be in the trash can. I had some more plants that had black rot on them, and I was thinking about just saving them for the video, but I was tired of looking at them and then possibly spreading it, so they just got chucked in the can. Didn't want to keep them around. And you want to make sure you wash your hands after you touch these plants. you saw me a minute ago touch another plant, and that was a no-no. I shouldn't have done that. You want to make sure you wash your hands, your instruments, everything when you're dealing with this, because it is very pathogenic. It spreads very easily, just like some of the other diseases. But the sinister thing about black rot is that it moves so quickly. It can infect the tissues, and you'll notice it one day just in a tiny little spot. You come back 24 hours later and it's all the way down through the leaf into the pseudobulb or whatever. So it moves very quickly. Under the right conditions, when you have lots of ample moisture, it can move through the plant at speeds that would make your head spin. And just now, like I said, it stinks. I can smell it on my hands. It is a terrible, nasty smell. One of the two, it's either Pythium or Phytophthora, doesn't usually smell, and the other one smells horrendous. And I never can remember which one it is. I think Phytophthora is the real stinky one. But that being said, guys, you want to keep up with your fungicide treatment, especially when you have plants that are subjected to rainfall, like all these here are. We obviously can't bring all of these plants inside, and so even though it's not ideal, when Mother Nature throws these storms at us, the only thing we can do is be good preventative sprayers and just cross your fingers and hope. Otherwise, you just bring the plants in out of the rain. And that is why I had this problem, is because I was not vigilant. I did not spray my chemicals beforehand like I should have. So I want y'all to learn from my mistakes. And you know, it is depressing saying it, but I have the chemicals to do it. I just did not use them, and they don't do any good sitting on the shelf. So make sure you if you value your plants and you know that conditions are going to be conducive for black rot, that you get ahead of it, so you don't end up like me, chucking plants in the trash can. Let's see if we can find something. Well, hold on. We're going to sit you down for a minute. I'm going to wash my hands. All right, we are back. Sorry, I had to wash my hands because I just touched some really nasty plants. So here we go. I bare rooted this. Here's another example of too little, too late. So here's another Pythium. This is a punctatum. You can tell there was some black rot here on this newest growth. I tried to bare root it, cut it off. It was not enough. This plant had not had any fungicide, and so even though I soaked it in some fungicide, I did not get to it in time for it to be taken up by the plant. And obviously I did not remove enough of the infectious material, because I don't know if y'all can notice that on camera, but that is brown and squishy, and it is brown and squishy right here. And even though these bulbs look fine, it is brown and squishy right there. So this guy is probably toast. So another, here is what I'm hoping to be a success story. This is Laelia purpurata, variety Schusteriana. This plant was growing in lava rock, but nonetheless it was exposed to those 18 inches of rain, and it started off, and multiple days I trimmed foliage that had it, and I thought I had got ahead of it. It came back into some more growths, and so I had to surgically remove those with hot sterile clippers, and all the while for multiple days in a row I doused this with a Banrot and Ridamil. But now it seems to have stopped. Crossing my fingers, because I love this plant. It's the only piece I have of it, so I really hope I don't lose that. But so far there's no more active infection from what I can see, so let's hope it stays that way. See what else we can find. Ooh, there's thunder. Not Pythium or Phytophthora, but let's stop and look real quick. Catherine's favorite plant here, Dendrobium frostodon. It always seems to succumb to some of this anthracnose during the rainy season. Some of the foliage gets this. This plant does naturally drop a lot of foliage. It doesn't go to completely deciduous, but it does drop a lot of leaves. But I've noticed that stress will seem to induce a lot of anthracnose, and I've already treated this plant multiple times with fungicide, because there's no way in hell I want my wife to have to hear the words, "Your frosty dawn is dead." But yes, this looks like some sort of anthracnose, or it could just be environmental stress causing the foliage to weaken, and an opportunistic fungi is just eating the dead material. But this one was also exposed to 18 inches of rain in 48 hours, so there you go. You get some of that going on there. So let's get rid of that. Just doing a quick look around. We found our next victim. Sitting down here next to the pool. So this plant had a little bit of it going on a couple weeks ago. I thought a good fungicide treatment and trimming would have gotten rid of it. But it looks like we got a little bit of it going on right there. I don't know if y'all noticed that, but there's a brown mushy growth here. That looks brown and mushy. The rest of this plant looks pretty good. I might be able to just get away with ripping out 3 or 4 bulbs, maybe damage a bit of new growth, but if it saves the rest of the plant, so be it. So yeah, that there ain't good. That ain't good at all. So yeah, we'll have to get rid of that. Is there anything else over here that looks infected? Luckily, I'm not seeing anything, which that's good. There was an entire Cattleya on this Robolini palm here that was just full of it. Black rot all over. I mean, within like a couple days, the whole thing just turned black. So we ripped that off of there and just threw buckets of fungicides and ban rot on this, hoping that it doesn't spread to this Encyclia phoenicia. There's an Encyclia cordidra down there. But yeah, there was a plant here that had black rot, bad, serious black. So that had to go. All right, guys. So this plant fell off, and I don't know how long it's been sitting on the ground, but there you go. There's some more of it. Well, y'all can see that. So this plant was sitting on the ground. It probably got rain. It was anything that hits the ground is in contact with the ground for any period of time. Here amongst the weeds here, you know, that we grow so well. Anything that hits the ground, just, I mean, immediately you're like, oh, that's gonna get black rot, because it's probably hanging out in the soil. A lot of plants that are, you know, terrestrial, they tolerate it a little bit better. They're not as affected by it as these epiphytes. But once these epiphytes hit the ground, they come in contact with the disease. They're not used to it, and they are very susceptible to it, and the rest is history. It takes over. So that plant may just go to the garbage. I'm not sure. Depends on how much work I want to do. Hopefully, here amongst this, I'm not seeing anything else. I am seeing lots of weeds. We're gonna have to tell the orchid grower needs to get out here and start picking some weeds. It's funny, it's me. I'm the one that needs to do that. So note to self, pull weeds. And you know, weeds, guys, are not as here I am touching plants with my dirty hands. Weeds are not as benign as they seem. Like I said, there's certain plants that can be vectors for diseases. Not to say that these particular weeds are vectors, natural host for black rot, but some of them can be natural host for disease or pathogenic species. They may not be affected by the disease, but they carry it along, and then you've just transferred it to your orchid collection because they're growing together. I can't tell if this looks like it might have been some sunburn on that foliage, but that does not look good. Actually, that might be a little bit of black rot. I'm trying to touch this with the hand that I be very careful. I'll have to come out here and just trim all that out. It looks like it could have been a little bit of sunburn. Maybe some of it got into the tissues and was opportunistic. So you do have to be careful about, you know, sunburn creates a point of entry for some of these disease-causing pathogens. So just because you have sunburn, You think, oh, it'll heal itself. Keep an eye out. It's just like a wound on us. Wounds can be easily infected. So keep that in mind. Here's a little bit. See how it's not always black? Sometimes on like these encyclias, this had it and I pulled it out of its pot. I knew it was happening. It's not always black. Sometimes it's just brown, but it usually stinks. Yep, it smells awful. The smell test. I like to do the smell test. I like stinky things. Usually you stick your nose in it and you're like, yeah, that's black rot. Has terrible smell. Well guys, that was a little bit of information there for y'all. It was a little bit rambly, but I just got off of work, so I'm a little bit tired and my head's a little bit worn from a hard day's work outside, but hopefully y'all learned something. Let's talk about the chemicals. So just to go over it once again, some good preventative maintenance with something like Banrot, Terrazol, Ridamil, Alliet. Again, a fungicide that's labeled for the Oomycetes. Something that doesn't normally cause disease in orchids is downy mildew, but downy mildew isn't, I believe, an Oomycete. It's related to these pathogens. So anytime you find a fungicide that says it works on downy mildew, it usually works on Pythium and Phytophthora, not always. So just read the label. But those are good, really good. Another good thing that you could use would be hydrogen peroxide for your cuts and stuff. When you're dealing with plants that may have a little bit of it going on and you get ahead of it quickly, you can use your peroxide to sterilize the wounds. A lot of people use something called Xylitol. Xylitol, if you can get your hands on it, is a really good chemical. It's just peracetic acid and hydrogen peroxide. So it is pretty caustic stuff, but it's just hydrogen peroxide and acetic acid. The peracetic acid is it's an acetic acid molecule with a peroxide. But that's a really good chemical to spray. You can burn with that, so you got to be careful. But that's a really good chemical, just as a good sanitation practice. You could spray on your plants when you've had torrential rain. Say you've had 3 or 4 days of rain. As soon as it stops, you can go out there with the Xylitol, spray your plants down, and that kind of acts as like almost does what Physan does, as it's a general disinfectant. You'll kill a lot of the disease spores and pathogens that are floating around, so that you nip them in the bud before they even get a chance to infect your plants. So that's all I got for you today, guys. I don't have smell-o-vision so that y'all can smell this delightful smell. Even after you wash your hands with something like Dawn, you still smell it on your hands. It takes a few hours for that smell to go away. It's rancid. But that's black rot, guys. If you want to not have this, don't be like me and make sure you spray your plants. All right, that's all I got for you. We'll see y'all in the next video.